Yahoo everyone, this is Sylvie Sensei. Perhaps some of you already knew me from Sylvie Sensei's course last semester when I gave a short lecture on the topic of cultural hacking. This time I'm back to give you a different presentation titled Flow Across Culture. For those of you who don't know me yet, my full name is Jingyang Lim. I'm also on social media, sometimes as Sharap Jin, and I am a social entrepreneur, mindfulness, yoga, and martial arts teacher, and a freelance content creator. As a Malaysian Chinese, I studied abroad in Japan and graduated from Waseda and Peking University, majoring in liberal arts education and international relations. I'm also a Schwarzman scholar for the 2021 to 22 cohort. The concept, principle, and word flow has been a core interest and passion of my life. In fact, my senior year thesis paper was written on the topic of flow, in which I mapped out the research of flow using Ken Wilber's integral theory. By now you're probably wondering, what the heck is flow? Flow, in positive psychology as expounded by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, is actually a state of mind when we feel and perform at our best. It is a time when we're so completely involved in an activity for its own sake because it feels good. Our ego, or a sense of self, falls away. Time becomes distorted, meaning that you could feel the passing of time either slower or faster, or even both at the same time. Regardless of time, you're in control of what you're doing. Every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one. Like an orchestra or jazz performance, your whole being is involved, and you're using your skills to the utmost. Flow is a pleasant state of mind, sometimes described as being quote-unquote in the zone. It is what drives a lot of people to pursue what they're doing, whether it's Steve Jobs founding and growing Apple company, or an artist spending hours, days, and months on a piece of art, musicians coming together to perform as a band, or extreme sports athletes like Alex Honnold free soloing El Capitan in search of union with nature. In a TED Talk, Csikszentmihalyi named flow as the secret to happiness. It is, quote, only through the direct control of our experience, the ability to derive moment-by-moment enjoyment from everything we do, can we overcome the obstacles to achieving happiness and fulfillment, end quote. In his best-selling book Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, Csikszentmihalyi wrote, "The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile." End quote. To accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. In other words, flow isn't a simple, pleasurable state. It is a sense of fulfillment that we derive from doing something meaningful. Another way of seeing flow is as this sweet zone between anxiety and boredom. If a task is too challenging, you become anxious because you cannot cope with its difficulty. If it's too easy, you become bored over time. In order to be in flow, to find this sense of fulfillment, you need to have a balanced perceived challenge over skill ratio. You're dealing with a challenge that is not easy, but at the same time not too daunting that it intimidates you. Once you overcome a challenge, just like in an RPG game, you level up, and so you need to increasingly find greater challenges and continuously improve your skills and face those new challenges in order to be in flow again and again. Researchers suggest that the ideal challenge to skill ratio for getting into flow is about 4% difficulty. Let's take book reading as an example, a common flow activity in which many people around the world have found it intrinsically rewarding, meaning that you do it just for the sake of doing it, because it feels good. So in order to enjoy reading a book, one must have at least a decent level of proficiency in the language that a book is being written in, as well as some knowledge of the context or subject of the book. When I first started learning Japanese during my freshman year in Japan, there was no way in which I could read a novel in Japanese, let alone getting into flow to reading a Japanese novel. In the same way, even though I consider myself a close to native English speaker, it would still be difficult for me to find flow, say, in reading a PhD thesis paper related to biochemistry, because it is a few rather foreign to me despite being written in English. To be in flow, one needs to find an article or book that is interesting to him or her and slightly challenging, but in a manageable way. Perhaps there are some new vocabulary words that we may have to look up in the dictionary, but as long as we could understand the gist content, learn new ideas along the way, and make connections with our pre-existing base of knowledge, it's quite possible to get into a state of flow through reading. Before going deeper into flow, let's return to the general theme of your course, understanding culture. How is flow related to culture? First, let's take a look at the definition of culture. According to Zimmerman from Life Science, culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as, quote-unquote, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, end quote. Here I've personally added in the word science because I believe that we can find elements of both arts and sciences as well as interaction of both views in creating boundless human manifestations. Just take a look at the culture of our modern society, say, how we move around a city. One way of seeing the culture in Tokyo is to look at how behaviors of people are shaped by the map and infrastructure of the city. Whether it's living in high-rise buildings or commuting through public transportation such as buses and trains. All of these are human inventions, scientific and technological advancements that contribute to what we call an urban culture. So science no doubt shapes culture. The last definition that I've listed here, which I found in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is that culture is, quote-unquote, the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Therefore, I would summarize the definition of culture as the overall traits, behaviors, characteristics, knowledge of a social group, as well as the arts, sciences, and all other manifestations of human intellectual achievements collectively. This may include languages, religions, traditions, skills, food, values, the list goes on and on. So it seems like culture can encompass almost everything, as long as it is created by a group of Homo sapiens. Today we live in a globalized world, and it feels like we all have different yet similar cultures. We're born out of different traditional or national backgrounds, yet we also share common values and ways of living in a globalized economy. Do we share the same culture? Perhaps not if we look at it in terms of religion or racial norms. But take a look at our current state of a pandemic-stricken world. We're now all part of this web culture of communicating through technology. The very fact that we're watching this presentation right now with our laptop or smartphone means that we're all interconnected in a similar culture. So culture is a very fuzzy word, and because it touches on so many topics that are intertwined, it takes a lot of time and energy to learn about a foreign culture. Also, it is important to learn about other cultures in order to help us understand the perspective of other social groups. Recently, when I asked a mentor of mine, Professor David Hawley, a retired LA Times correspondent, on the question of what is most needed in today's geopolitical world, as we saw a rising sense of insecurity, conflict, and enmity between nation-states. His answer to me was that it would help a great deal for people of goodwill on both sides to try their best to make people on their side understand the complexity of arguments that are unfolding. Because in most conflicts, there's a human nature, a tendency to view the facts that fit our own side, our own benefits, and our own preconceived ideas. The media reports in that way, the school textbooks are written that way, and everybody thinks that my side is right, and that the other side is so disgusting. But if people somehow could be encouraged to deal with complexity, it would reduce the level of self-righteousness and reduce the likelihood of stumbling into wars that people don't really want. I believe that one of the first steps to understanding the complexity of arguments is to understand the culture which shapes the way people think about a difficult issue. In Sylvie Sensei's course last semester, I gave a presentation on culture hacking, a personal story on why, how, and what we can learn from cultures. If you're interested in this, you can still watch it on my YouTube channel and podcast, which are included in the description below. But in summary, I gave a model on hacking culture, which includes a 4-step process: observation, immersion, understanding, and integration. OI, UI, OI, and UI. I believe that if you really want to hack a culture, you need to engage all 5 senses when observing and immersing yourself in a new setting. You need to interact with the local people and apply analytical and critical thinking in trying to understand their culture. The final stage involves the integration of new knowledge and experiences, which allows you to learn, interact, and involve yourself in a new culture. So culture hacking is essentially a growth hacking or learning experience. So if flow tends to be the psychic signature of world-class performance and paradigm-shifting breakthroughs, because it can optimize performance, enhance creativity, drive innovation, accelerate learning, amplify memory, and underpin happiness itself, then I would say that flow is the essential key to culture hacking. Because if you can access flow on demand, you become a rapid learner, and you can speed up the 4-step process of observation, immersion, understanding, and integration by heightening your senses, remembering things better, learning languages faster, or retaining information more efficiently, just to name a few benefits of flow. What's more, most traditions and practices found across different cultures around the world are actually rooted in the model of getting people to enter flow states. Before I give you some examples of these, let's delve deeper into the triggers and characteristics of flow. In order to access flow, researchers have discovered several important triggers that will help you get into flow. A while ago, we just touched on one of them, which is a 4% challenge over skill ratio that corresponds with this sweet spot found between anxiety and boredom. The second precondition for entering flow is to have a clear set of goals. We used the example of book reading a while ago. The goal of reading a book is quite direct. That is to gain new knowledge from the author, and of course to finish reading it. You can further divide this goal into finishing a chapter a day or a week and trying to achieve those tiny milestones, depending on your own conveniency and level of challenge. It is only when you have goals that you can focus and direct your consciousness in the direction towards achieving them. The third precondition is to have a clear and immediate feedback, whether it's from self-reflection or feedback from others. Imagine trying to learn a whole new language on your own without the help of a teacher, a smart application, nor living in a country where it is being spoken. Given such a context in which you don't have anyone to give you feedback and advice on how well you're learning that foreign language, you'll probably feel lost and lose interest in learning it over time. There's no way you can enjoy the learning process if you don't even know whether you're pronouncing a word right or wrong. Whatever you pursue, whether it's an art or professional interest, you could access flow better if you could stop to assess how well you're doing from time to time, and better still if you have a mentor or coach to help give you feedback. So these are the 3 preconditions of entering flow. Internally, however, one has to cultivate the ability to focus intensely on what you're doing at the present moment, allowing his or her action and awareness to merge and the self to disappear. Once that happens, time becomes distorted, and as we mentioned in the beginning, you're in control of your actions. The trick to getting into flow is to cultivate what's called in Zen a beginner's mind. By letting go of preconceived notions, self-judgment, and just being receptive to what's coming next, engaging mindfully in a task, soon you might find yourself in flow. Csikszentmihalyi posits that the self becomes more complex following flow. That means you're growing in some way each time you come out from flow. Increased complexity involves 2 components: differentiation and integration. One way in which you can understand this is the deconstruction of complex processes into basic parts and learning these components one at a time, differentiation. After mastering them, you have to integrate these separated and autonomous parts as a whole, which is integration. The process of differentiation and integration requires the conversion of short-term memories into long-term memories, so that you're using more of your subconscious mind to process information rather than using your conscious mind. According to some research, the conscious mind can only process 40 bits of information per second, but our subconscious mind can process up to 20 million bits of information per second, which is about 500 times faster. Since most of you are in Japan, let me use the example of learning Japanese. As a complete beginner, you have to divide the Japanese writing system into memorizing hiragana, katakana, and simple kanji words separately. Then slowly, you learn simple phrases that contain a mixture of these three forms of writing. In the beginning, you have to stop and think about them consciously. I remember watching some of the billboards in Shinjuku Station and pausing for a while to try and read them out, and then figuring out what they actually mean. But over time, you learn more complex grammatical structure, and after learning how to construct sentences, you soon master reading simple texts and trying to converse with people in simple Japanese, that you don't have to think so hard about them anymore. A couple years later, when you're able to have a free, casual conversation with a native Japanese speaker, when you no longer have to consciously think about whether to use ru or mas form or des, deshita, deska in a sentence, by then your brain has already internalized these different parts of information as a whole and are kept in your long-term memory, which are naturally processed using your subconscious mind when speaking or reading. This principle of flow applies across aspects of culture that requires mastery. For example, in teaching yoga, we usually start by teaching simple basic poses called asana that one can hold on for a short period of time. Once you master simple basic poses, you can string them together into what's called a vinyasa, a sequence. And for many yogis, they continue to challenge themselves by trying to achieve more difficult poses and vinyasas, such as doing arm balances, handstands, splits, etc., in order to be in a state of flow. Traditional yogis, however, see yoga more as a tool to control the mind, because the goal of yoga is to essentially calm or still the mind. So even if they don't challenge their body with increasingly difficult poses, they challenge their mind by going into deeper states of meditation. The same theory applies to chess. A chess player must first learn all the numerical equivalent worth of chess pieces and the fundamental principles of endgame, middle game, and opening play before he or she could become a real master. Chess prodigy Josh Waitzkin wrote in his book, The Art of Learning, that one should internalize those bundles of information by allowing the intuition or subconscious mind to integrate more and more principles into a sense of flow. Eventually, the foundation is so deeply internalized that it is no longer needed to be consciously considered. In the same way, martial artists have to practice punches, kicks again and again before synchronizing them as a kata in karate, or a set of movements, and then continually practice executing those synchronized movements with greater speed, strength, and precision. For the past few months during this pandemic lockdown worldwide, I've had the opportunity to learn shodo or calligraphy from a local master here in my hometown back in Penang, Malaysia. The art of learning Chinese or Japanese calligraphy is like learning piano, dance, ballet, chess, or any other sports based on flow principles. We start by learning how to make simple strokes and then integrating these strokes to form a character. Then you practice writing different characters and learning how strokes are arranged to form an aesthetically beautiful character. After practicing again and again, now we can integrate those characters into lines of poem and even continue growing by learning different forms of calligraphy. The point is that learning never stops. You see, now you can also delve into the art of poetry if you want to compose them in calligraphy. So it just opened up a new world through this idea of increasing complexity found in flow. I know that this presentation is quite dense in information, but before I end, I would just like to explain more about the neurochemistry behind flow and how we can create a culture of flow and group flow, since this relates to culture as well. According to research done by Herbert Benson and synthesized by Stephen Kotler in his book, flow consists of a 4-stage flow cycle: struggle, release, flow, and recover. When you're met with a new challenge, your cortisol level starts to spike up, and your body secretes adrenaline and norepinephrine, which helps you amp up your energy and ability to focus. During this phase, it is important to not fight or flight, but to try and focus and relax your mental being. After some time, it is vital to let go of the struggle and proceed to the second phase, which is release. This is when you allow your brain and mind to rest for a moment or do something relaxing, such as taking a walk, meditate, take a nap, so that a different chemical change kicks in, which is the flooding of nitric oxide in the system. This endogenous gases signaling molecule causes stress hormones to decline and feel-good neurochemicals like dopamine and endorphins to rise in their place. If we're lucky enough and all the conditions are ripe, we can then return to our endeavor or challenge at hand and move into a state of flow. When we're in flow, stress hormones are being replaced by performance-enhancing and pleasure-producing compounds such as dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, serotonin, and oxytocin. These neurochemicals improve pattern recognition in the brain, amplify lateral thinking, which is our ability to link disparate ideas together. It relieves pain, produces pressure, inhibit our fear, and elevate our mood. Serotonin and oxytocin are usually released at the tail end of a flow state, helping people cope with adversity and are responsible for the afterglow effect of flow, prompting feelings of peace, well-being, trust, and sociability as we start to integrate the information that has just been reviewed. Because we consume a whole deal of information and energy during flow, sometimes we go through a crash, a state of depletion of energy, and thus need to recover and allow our body to rest and our brain to consolidate what we just learned into long-term memory. The recovery period depends on the intensity of your activity. One thing that I would like to add in is that when we're in flow, hormones such as oxytocin and dopamine not only makes us feel good, but also help increase bond between people and even make them fall in love if they were in flow doing something together. This brings us to the topic of group flow. How can we flow together? The triggers for entering group flow are built on top of the basic flow principles we've already touched on. University of North Carolina psychologist Keith Sawyer has written extensively on group flow in his book Group Genius. Extending from the characteristics and triggers of flow we mentioned earlier, it is important for a group of people or friends to have common or shared goals, to seek new challenges together, concentrate collectively on a single task, which leads to the blending of their egos into one single group, and to be in control of their actions, yet flexible to accommodate the needs of each member. This requires reciprocal feedback and mindful open communications by practicing close listening to one another. It is also helpful to cultivate a common language, a sense of familiarity, the acceptance of one another without judgment, and equal participation in activities that can provide a sense of growth and fulfillment. When research is being made on artists and extreme sports athletes, they found out that a rich environment in nature, which has lots of novelty, complexity, and unpredictability in the environment, as well as having a high consequence that is some kind of risk, which could be physical, mental, social, emotional, also helps to trigger people into flow. Keeping in mind all the benefits that flow can provide us in terms of happiness, fulfillment, and how it can strengthen relationships as well as our learning capacity, there's so much potential in creating a culture of flow cultivators. In fact, the principles of flow are already being applied in some academies around the world. Montessori education is one of them. In Montessori classrooms, teachers provide students with a work plan so that they know exactly what they should be working on at any given time, and should never have to sit and wait for a teacher to tell them what to do next. They are given constant feedback through direct communications from the teachers, and even provided self-correcting materials to modulate their own work. The curriculum is also designed so that the difficulty and complexity gradually increases as the child masters each concept, and each child works independently at their own pace. Studies have shown that children in Montessori middle school classrooms experience flow significantly more often than students at the traditional middle school. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Finally, what I want you to take away from today's presentation is to reflect on your own learning experience. Try and apply some of those flow triggers and see if you could find flow in your own life. At the same time, while you're studying about culture, see how certain aspects of culture relate to flow. You can think of group flow as a form of culture itself that can be practiced by your own social group, whether it's in your classroom, clubs, bukatsu, or within your own circle of close friends. By applying the principles of flow, we can foster more effective group learning and stronger camaraderie between friends and family. Last but not least, thank you so much for listening. There's actually so much more that I wish to share with you, but time's limited and I should not bog you down with too much information as well. If you're interested in reading up more about flow, I highly recommend you to check out Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, or Stephen Kotler's The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance, if you're interested in the neuroscience of flow. If you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to email or message me on social media. My contacts are listed below. Take care and ciao.